It's an honor and a privilege to come back to my hometown and to have a moment to speak with and together with other friends and alumni and fans, if you will, of Jesuit works and Jesuit institutions. I think I scared you a little bit, oh my God, he's going to come and talk to us about poverty, what a way to ruin someone's lunch. And on top of it, it's not a good thing for business people. Business people always get a bad rap in the church. If you go through gospel, it's the awful manager, it's the evil of money, and oh my God, here we go again. And on top of it, it's Mardi Gras. So what are we going to do about that? So I promise I'm not going to go there for you. If I try to do anything, I might try to rehabilitate Judas Iscariot in the course of my talk, because I think he has something to offer us. But I will take as a starting point for my talk this afternoon is this vow of poverty that Jesuits and other religions take. When I entered the Society of Jesus, it wasn't a big thing for me, this vow of poverty. As a person, having things was never really very important to me. And so when people talked about this vow of poverty, fine. I was going to be able to be free to do what I wanted to do. I was going to be able to serve. And so I didn't have to worry about keeping a checkbook and balancing the budget. Someone else, little did I know future was going to be me, someone else was going to have to take care of that. And that was fine. And so I entered into a Jesuit life that is primarily and essentially one of an apostolic life. We Jesuits, and many of you experienced the fruit of that, we're there to serve and to make things happen, to help young men grow to be people that have a sense of compassion and service and a dedication to the needs of others. And as you listen to the conversations in this room, I'm sure you hear that reinforced among the people that are here. But then along the road, as Ray mentioned, I get asked by our provincial to be a treasurer. Now, you heard my curriculum vitae. I don't think you ever heard that I took a course in accounting, nor management, nor economics. But then I find myself the treasurer of the Detroit province. So I had to go off to Rome to learn the secret handshake, or whatever we do, and I was invited to have lunch with, at that time, the general of the society, Father Klovenbach, in his private little dining room. Here I am, this kid from Jesu Parish in Detroit, and I'm having lunch with the general of the Society of Jesus. And he's saying to me at one portion of the lunch, he says, "Well, Father, I understand that you will become the new treasurer of the Detroit province." Yes, Father, yes, I've been asked to do that, but I'm puzzled by this because having things has never been important to me, and now all I'm supposed to do is think about having things. He turns to me and he says, "Well, Father, we can find God in all things, can't we?" Well, I took it as kind of an admonition. He was a kind of a man who liked to needle people, but the message stayed with me that, it is a part of the Jesuit life, seeking where God is in all things, and there is the goodness of that. And I'll return to that theme because, as I said earlier, this whole concept of business world and money and management as being bad is something we have to return to and we have to look at again, finding God's goodness in all things. But my whole journey through my Jesuit life has been more and more involved in management. As Ray mentioned, I was the president of a school, principal of a school, superior of several communities. And in that, I learned quite a bit thanks to wonderful colleagueship with men and women who helped me along the way to understand what it meant to be a good steward, a good manager, someone who could help us vision the future and steward wisely the things before me. A personal story on all this, in the role of money was my mother. Every time I would get a new assignment, I would call her and say, "Mom, I've got a new assignment, And God love her, her first question was always, "Well, will you be happy?" And then once I kind of talked a little bit and I said, no, this is fine and I'm looking forward to that, she had to affirm me in that. And so for my mother, it was always the same thing. So when I was going to Walsh Jesuit High School, this is Superior in Akron, Ohio, and when she heard that I said I would be happy, she said, well, you know, they have money. And I said, you mean the Goodriches, the Firestones? No, the Akrons. They had money. I said, Mom, Akron is the name of the highest point in the country. No, the Akrons had money. All right, stop. Mom, you're right. So then I was later assigned to Regis High School in New York City, which was very close to Park Avenue and the Upper East Side. And I said, oh, Mom, I'm going to Regis. She said, you'd be happy, yes. She says, and I knew where this was going. So I said, Mom, well, the school is right across the street from Park Avenue where Jackie Kennedy was buried from. She says, oh, you'll be happy there. So I can't imagine what she thinks now that I'm the treasurer of the Society of Jesus, but that's another question. But so what does the general treasurer of the Society of Jesus do, just to give you a quick overview of that? One little anecdote I was just sharing with Chris at the table. During World War II, we hid in our backyard when there was rationing in Rome. We hid 2 cows, and we used that as our supply for milk. And it was the job of the general treasurer of the Society of Jesus at that time every morning to take a liter of milk over to Pope Pius XII. Not my job today. The job has changed a little bit in its focus, as well as has our service to the church. My job entails 2 small things, but one very large thing. One is just to manage our local budget. What are our costs, making sure our bills get paid. Second is to manage some of the assets of the Society of Jesus. Many of the provinces that we have throughout the world who have funds to support the education of Jesuits and for their health care and for starting new works have no place to invest them. So they turn to us, and in some cases to other provinces, to manage their money for them. So that becomes a part of my job, helping them to become good stewards of their resources and plan for it. But the largest thing and most important thing that our office provides to the government of the Society of Jesus is advice on management. And I think, well, that's a no-brainer. Well, I wish it was a no-brainer. Because in the church, and we've seen stories, and I suspect we will continue to hear stories, we don't have good management history. If you look at where we prepare men, unfortunately, it's men who lead dioceses and are pastors of parishes, and for us, superiors of communities and provincials. Our programs do not involve management. I told you, my management training was through my ability to work with very gifted leaders in industry who taught me the skills that I had. But it was not part of my program of education. And so when I work in Rome with those who have been elected to serve, there's no guarantee that those who are there have that experience. It's something I want to talk about a little bit later on, because I think this is part of my invitation to many of you in terms of the church moving forward. So it's important to be able to insert in decision-making a new concept of strategic thinking, of planning, not allowing finances being the emergency response to a solution, but finance, management, and its skills be the beginning of a process of long-term viability and sustainability, which I believe continues to be a widespread challenge, maybe less so, but still present in our U.S. church, but even more so as we think of the international church and as the church is developing in parts of Africa and Asia and Latin America, where the history that perhaps our country has and the richness of experience is lacking or is unaware. One of my experiences of that was even with the past general treasurer. I was having a meeting with my investment committee, people who come from different parts of the world to advise me on strategic aspects of the investments we have, asset allocation, rebalancing, when to let a manager go and the like. I said, well, Father Nicholas, they're coming to have their meeting here, annual meeting in Rome, and I'll schedule you to meet with them. And he's going, no. You go. And that's fine. And I said, no, you have to go. It's your job. Now, I walked out of that room saying, who's this kid from Detroit telling the General Society of Jesus, this is your job? But someone has to say that to the leadership in the church. It's a message that's extremely critical, not only in our own country, and I think in our own country we're beginning to learn that, but in other parts of the world. It is responsible management and those skills and those resources or openness to those conversations that are essential for the mission of the church. But let's go back to this poverty thing. Many of you have gone through a Jesuit high school, and if you were in, like when I was back in the 60s or in the 70s, there was always the story about the beer truck that showed up at the Jesuit residence, Yeah, you've heard that story, stuff like that, So there was this kind of like, yeah, those poor Jesuits, but the beer truck, which was probably arriving for the Alumni Association meeting, was pulling up to us, But that was the joke. Yeah, those Jesuits, those poor Jesuits, as we saw these things rolling in. Or another experience, it was shortly after I had been appointed general treasurer, and I was visiting a house in the United States in a province that didn't know me personally, and I was staying in a community. I'd come down and come into the living room, and a couple of Jesuits were sitting there, and it was before dinner, and they were having a drink before dinner, and they offered me something, and I said, oh, that's fine. And we're chatting. He said, what's your name? So I told him, Tom McClain. Well, what do you do? I said, I'm the treasurer of the Society of Jesus. The comment, it's cheap scotch. It's cheap scotch. Yeah, so here's the big man coming to control your money. Or another one where this poverty just gets disconnected. I was having a conversation with the head of one of the regions of the Society of Jesus, and he wanted me to believe that it cost them in the course of 1 year to educate, feed, and train a Jesuit $1,000. I said, you can't do that for $1,000. Well, we have, other income, but we don't put it on the books. But we can't tell people that it costs more because then they won't think we're poor. And I said, well, do you think they're stupid? You're educating, you're clothing them, they have servants, you're giving a degree in a country where that is a luxury. But they have to think that we're poor. So this vow of poverty has lost its meaning, I think, in our world. It becomes a joke. It's a misnomer. We're trying to eradicate poverty. And yet, this poverty that Christ talks about in the gospel, this poverty that we're called to embrace, not just as religious men and women and nuns and priests, but all of us, followers of Christ, are to embrace, it's lost its meaning if it means to be indigent and simple and going without. Because we still can find God in all things. We still can find God in the goodness of the food that we're eating. We should not be guilty about that. So what happens to this poverty? When we were an immigrant church, way back in the 1800s, it had a different sense. When we talked about a church that was struggling to survive, that someone dedicated themselves to a simple life, was not that so different from families that were struggling to make a living on an immigrant's salary. And in that context, going without for the sake of the common good and living that life, everyone was doing it, and it made sense. And some threw their lot in with others to serve the church. But our world has changed. And we as a Society of Jesus and Jesuit Spirituality, our spirituality is one that, and you've probably heard the word, it's incarnational. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, finding God in all things. We find God's experience in the culture around us. We find God's goodness and his modeling of love in those things that we experience in our culture. But I don't think we allowed our vow of poverty to follow forward on that way. One of my assistants, I have 3 Jesuits who are my assistants, and their job is to be specialists in various parts of the world, to be knowing what's going on in their country, so if a question comes, they're a specialist. So one of my assistants went to visit one of the provinces in the developing world, and he was meeting with the provincial and with his assistants, and he says, I visited a lot of your communities, your work. He said, you have a problem. You have 5 of your 7 communities have deficits every year. 2 of your institutions need to put a budgeting system in place so they know what their expenses are. And all of a sudden the provincial stops him and said, hold on. Stop. You're talking about business. We don't do business, we do ministry. Well, I don't know how you do that without being realistically focused in the world. So what has changed? When the vow of poverty began in the church, the world was an agrarian economy. It was interesting. The Society of Jesus in our constitutions doesn't have a treasurer. It has a procurator. And that tells me the whole story. What does a procurator do in an agrarian society? He raises and procures what we need to get through the winter. And so what 2 qualities do you want in that person? Secretive and stingy. If I told you how much I had, you'd want it. And if I gave you more, I wouldn't get you through the winter. So the role of the procurator, eventually the treasurer, became the bad guy. It was the no-sayer. So why would you ask him for advice? He's going to tell you no, or I don't know, I'd have to look into it, and was not helpful. And that was also part of our local church. Each parish was to survive on its own. Each parish raised money, built a school, had its surpluses. It was with great pain that these archdiocesan development programs that we had to help the archdiocese was forced on people because the mindset was local. There was an occasional kind of nod to the missions. And we do a fundraising a gesture in the schools. I can remember, and some of you may remember, in the grade schools, the sisters, there was a period where, you would raise money for the pagan babies. Do you remember that? And then you got to name the pagan baby, Many Marys and Patricks. You can imagine my experience when a Jesuit arrived in Rome from one of the African countries, about 10 years younger to me. He came up and introduced him as Patrick. My pagan baby? Who knows? I just... But that was the mentality we had. All right, we did a little thing, but what was about the parish? It was all very local. The mentality in the church and in our society was, it's my money. But what has happened? The economy of the world has changed. The dominant economy is no longer an agrarian one, it's a macro global economy. That's the one that is functioning in the world today. You can get tangerines any time of the year. You can put money in a bank, you can invest it for the long term, there's security in your resources. And the world has begun to think differently on how resources can be used, not locally, but suddenly it dawns on the world is that we are interdependent. We're not just local. That what I have and how I use it has impact larger than just my local community, my local space, my local focus. The business world, the political world has caught that on. And while we have said that we are a global church, we are a universal church, we are a church that has a universal mission, we have not shifted our ability to manage that mission, I believe, and has been my experience as general treasurer, in a way that the business world has done that. And so we keep it at an arm's length. we use the word multinational. Ugh. It's a bad thing, these multinationals, you know. And find God in all things. There is goodness in the ability of entities to prioritize and allocate assets for the goals and the purposes of the overall association. But I'm not sure that we have been able to shift our focus in that direction, to help people have a larger sense in the church of co-responsibility. So what does that do for me for the vow of poverty? Well, this is where I'm going to rehabilitate Judas. There are two spots in Scripture where I think Judas gives a sense of what Christ had in mind. Right? He kind of took it the wrong way, but, you know. But you remember that scene where the woman comes in and kneels before Jesus and has this rich perfume and she anoints Jesus' feet? It's Judas who says, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and money given to the poor?" Later, at the Last Supper, Judas goes out, and John says, since Judas kept the money bag, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the feast or to give something to the poor. So that initial community of Christ, of the apostles, you don't hear Christ saying, when I'm here, we're going to have a good time. We're going to eat. We're going to do what we need to do. But what we don't need, we use for others. And Judas spoke that out. Do we really need this perfume? Because our way of proceeding is to live more simply so that others may have. And that is how we choose to live. And so I think that is the shift that I invite the church, I invite religious to begin to think of when we think of this virtue of poverty. Because the witness of the agrarian model of living simply because doing without and abnegation is a good thing doesn't sell, doesn't make sense. It's unhealthy in our world today. But for entities, religious, to stand up and say, I choose with intentionality to live with less so that others may have more, is a significant witness in a consumeristic society which has a tendency to consume, to consume, to consume. And if something is left all over, I may consider to give it to those who are in need. I think there is evangelical witness. It's the evangelical witness of the early community of Christ to have that modeling of what it means to be poor for Christ. Living with intentionality so that, at least for those who have, from what we choose intentionally to make available for others can be used to help the needy. I struggle with this approach when I talk to people going around the society because I am biased on this. I can only talk out of my own experience of being one coming from the developed world, as we all are. I don't know what the other side of the spirituality of that from my brothers and sisters who live in developing worlds where they do not have the freedom to live with less so others may have more. But I think the solution in terms of being poor men and women, poor as Christ is poor, is that we live in a relationship of co-responsibility. That I who receive am open to being asked to be people of transparency, of responsibility, and of good management. And that's the struggle that I think we as a global society, as a church, need to learn from the business community. need to learn from the globally economic masters who have begun to develop systems of allowing transparency, models of good management, and long-range planning for sustainability to be a part of the sharing of what we have made available for those who have less, and entering into honest and frank conversations that build mutual trust and accountability. You know, we sent missionaries to many parts of the world, and we did it the best way we could. We sent them and said, you go there and you make that school happen, or you go there and you help this parish survive. And when they had difficulties, what did they do? They did what we did then. They wrote back and we sent them more money. Well, I'm struggling with the challenge of that, because those in that culture looked around and saying, I like that idea. Yeah. But building a local sense of co-responsibility and sustainability and building a sense of local philanthropy is something that I think we failed in trying to help our brothers and sisters in other worlds that are trying to build a church and a structure like we have done in the United States with the healthcare system, the school system, that we built out of a real need at that time for integrating into society. And they presume, oh, that's that American thing. You know, we don't do it here. And I'm saying you have to build that here. And we have to encourage that in our desire to share our resources to build a church that can serve a population that so desperately needs the message of Christ and the ability to grow as people of dignity and of great life in their world. So I think that is the challenge that I think it is for us as Jesuits, to begin to find, with our partners, men and women like yourselves in the business world, ways of communicating that. You know, my brother is here. I never tell my brother, nor my mother or my sisters, I'm needy, because I don't really feel it personally. And I'm a victim of the same kind of mindset. You know, when I go back to Rome, we've got enough money to pay the bills, and I have enough food on the table, and I don't feel it. I don't feel, nor do I communicate, the need of my brothers and the people in the provinces of Africa and in India and in Asia Pacific, who basically are struggling just to get food on the table to serve the people of the need. I don't plead on their behalf. And I say that's because I grew out of that culture of poverty as local. I don't feel it. But how do we build that sense of that co-responsibility and that feeling of need as a church to serve those that are more needy than ourselves? And it's changing the mindsets of our leaders who can get insecure because not having management skills. I mean, I look around and there are some great leaders of institutions here. Ted Munns is president of U of D High. He did get a degree in business administration, but I would point that out as an exception. It is people who have been appointed to positions and get insecure when skilled people like those we find here in this room want to offer advice and direction. My brother tries to tell me about real estate. I'm like, just go away, But I know he knows more about it. And how do I invite those conversations? And I look at the real estate issues that we face around the world. If you were in a Jesuit high school and Jesuit institution, you found ways to get things done even when we didn't want you to do it. We trained you well. And it's those skills that the church needs. It's those skills and your ability to find ways to get us to see, to get us to say, yeah, I think you're right, and I need your help. I need your resources. I need your wisdom. And there are efforts that are going on around that in this direction. There are ways that this is happening. I think of the leadership roundtable that's existing in the country to assist dioceses in better management of their resources. But that's still local. I want to invite, the concept is much more, can we build ourselves to think ourselves more globally? Because that's been my experience as the treasurer of the Society of Jesus. I see global needs. I see resources that are in one part of the world that could help another, but we haven't found ways of making that happen. We haven't built the trust and the ability to build those relationships so that the mission of the universal church can profit from what the business world, the non-religious world, if you will, has developed and has developed techniques to do that. We have to rehabilitate Judas. We have to rehabilitate the world of economy. We have to find God there and let God teach us how better to be, all of us, poor people, living with less so that others may have more, choosing to share our skills and being open and transparent for the good of the service of God's church. So those are some words I'd like to offer you today from my perspective and my experience of the little kid from Jesu Parish suddenly finding himself looking at the world, seeing its needs, and how can we work together to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Father McClain. We have about 5 minutes for question and answers. Mary Alice of our steering committee is the lady with the mic. So if you have a question for Father McClain, please wave your hand and she will come over.
No questions. I always can tell stories. You know, it's been a very special time to be. Oh, there's a question. Go ahead.
I'm loud. How do you do that service when you present yourself for the service and you're told we don't need it, we don't want it, it's not an urgent demand at this point? They're ignorant to what they really need and know. Right.
And the way we got away with it when we were in Jesuit high schools, we were disobedient, and we did it our own way anyways, you know? I mean, I think it is, you know, being strategic. You know, it's a very difficult question that I think we're facing in helping the church to become more open, more transparent. But also, it's not just the local. We can get caught up in the local management issues when the bishop doesn't talk to people or the pastor doesn't talk to people. But somehow it's got to trickle down that let's take it away from people, an institution. You know, if I were to say to Ted Munns or to Mark Lupp, you have an obligation in your school to care for the International High School Apostolate, they would look at me like I have a crazy head, 2 heads, or what is he getting off on? But if our spirituality says that we all are choosing somehow to live with less so that others may benefit, and we communicate that through our institutions to all our cultures, it begins to happen. But they need someone and a structure greater than themselves who prioritizes and says, this is where it needs. Otherwise, it becomes Band-Aid. It becomes less strategic. Business does that. We have a brand, says business. We want this brand to move in this area. And so we take assets from here, and you, Unit X here in Detroit, Michigan, you get less of your resources that you rank because we need them in city Y in Nairobi. Right? Well, we don't have that yet. But our church has those significant needs. And if we do communicate that to others, but your question is a valid one. How do we get that conversation to happen? How do we open those doors? You know, and I think structures like the Leadership Roundtable and other methods, boards of trustees, other different international kind of experiences help us to grow in that sense.
Hi, I believe you were in Rome when Pope Francis was selected. So can you tell us about your knowledge of him and how you interact with him and how you reacted when he became Pope and how he tells you to spend money?
Well, you know, his election night was a very interesting story. So a Jesuit from the United States was visiting in Rome. And I said, no, Dennis, come over. We'll go up to our roof and we'll look at the black smoke and then we'll go out to dinner. So we went up. It was raining. We were waiting. And the white smoke came up. So we ran down to the piazza and we waited for the announcement and he came out and stuff like that. And then I came back home. We went out to dinner afterwards and came back home and everyone was in bed. So I got up at the breakfast the next morning and came down. And you would have thought you were at a wake. Oh my God, Bergoglio's got elected. It's over. We're done for. Because the Latin American Jesuits truly believed that he was an enemy to the Society of Jesus and that he was going to cut us down. Because as Cardinal Archbishop, he had no relationships with the Society of Jesus. When he came to Rome, he never visited a Jesuit house. He served his diocese. He was distant from us. So the Father General, his council was meeting on Monday, and then we all were supposed to meet in the chapel before luncheon, and he said, all right, Bergoglio's been elected, and we're here to serve the Holy Father, and this is the letter we've been working on all morning to send to him. He read the letter, here to available to serve, and grateful for your service to the church, and so forth. And he says, we're going to send this off, and he makes this comments, I'll never forget, and the files are sealed. I'm going, the files are sealed? What's in the files? Then the next day, the front desk, Andrea, you can find this on YouTube, there's a little video there. Andrea picks up the phone and goes, Curator of the Society of Jesus, and the other end goes, yes, this is Pope Francis, I'd like to talk to the general. And he goes, excuse me? And he says, no, this is Pope Francis, who is this? And he says, oh, I'm Andrea. Andrea, how are you today? He says, well, I'm a little confused. And he said, no need to be confused. This is the Pope, and I got a letter from the Holy Father, from the General to talk to him. So he passes it up to Brother Wobeto, who's Father General's assistant. Hello, Father General's office. He says, this is Pope Francis. He says, oh, we're praying for you, says Brother Wobeto. And the Pope says to him, are you praying that I stay or that I go? And he says, oh, no, that you stay, that you stay. And he's walking over to Father General's office. Usually he knocks on the door. He didn't knock. He opens the door and he goes, the Pope. And he hands him the phone. They had a wonderful discussion, and the mood in the house just turned on a dime. I want to work with you. Looking forward to the services that we can do together in terms of the service of the church. And over the years, he comes to our house maybe once a year for lunch. And it's a low-key, non-event. The Pope comes to lunch, non-event. But he comes, and he comes in the back with his driver and his Ford Focus, and they pulled in the backyard, and he gets out, and he comes in, and we don't dress up. I mean, it's no T-shirt and jean kind of meal, but, it's... And then he stays afterwards for coffee, and he comes around, and every time that he has an event like this, or when he has these small little audiences with people, he structures it in such a way so that he can greet everybody. And so he comes up and has coffee, and he shakes everybody's hand, and has a little conversation, and humorous story, one time he was there, and one of the Jesuits from India was about to go back home to visit his family, and he said, Holy Father, I'm going back and visit my mother, and he pulls out a rosary. He said, would you be willing to bless this rosary for my mother? And the Holy Father says, sure. And he blesses it for him, and then he turns to me and says, and that'll be €5. And the Jesuits kind of, I don't have any money, and stuff like that. And then the Holy Father just kind of, no, and you kind of move on. But so, it's very easy to be with him and very present. And it makes a big difference to me that the top guy gets it. I love the vision piece. And it makes it easier for us, I think, to serve the church when, like in any institution, the middle management may be more preoccupied with the details and the rules and the regulations. But he calls us again, be people that are welcoming to everybody, be open to conversation, because it's working together that we build the kingdom of God. And with that message, I think we're all encouraged. So, and Patty, you gave me the lead. I was going to tell stories. That was the story. So perfect timing there. So I didn't even have to pay you for that. So that's great.
Father, yes, I have one question. And one of the things you discussed was this global idea. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this organization or not. I think it's based in Africa. It's called Give Directly. And it's counterintuitive to what a lot of people think, because they're actually giving money directly to families, not a lot, but enough for them to decide how to use that money best. And they're finding that most of the people that are using it to improve their lives by buying a cow or a couple of animals or doing something in the community that helps everybody. Just start what you think about that kind of a concept.
No, I think, those kinds of things, I think it's wonderful, but I think we have to build the other side of the equation, that those people that are living in that culture that are receiving and are very needy, also building a culture that they too have to give. And that's the difficulty that I think I struggle with a lot of the developing world, when I kind of say, you know, you have to build local philanthropy. And they said, no, that's an American thing. We don't do that here. And I'm saying, I don't believe you. In Africa, the tribe takes care of the tribe. Don't tell me that. That's not going to happen in your culture, you know. Get them to give you a chicken. I don't care. But build that sense so that you can be a self-sustaining church. So we can help. But we've got, I think, a smaller window of time, you know, where some, at least as I look at some of the structures in the United States and in Europe, where there are huge resources that we are using for the good of others, are beginning to diminish. And I'm saying to these people in the developing world, we're here to help. But if you don't start building a system of self-sustaining abilities, but the giver never wants to ask that of the other. And I think that's what the global macro shift means. You know, is that I give, but I ask of you some accountability, some ability to build a structure that's going to be able to sustain that, what I'm helping you to bridge in the time of your difficulty. So I don't know how you do that. I mean, I think there are creative models of helping directly those that are needing, getting rid of the middle management. You know, that's fine. But how do we as a church build that co-responsibility? It can't be building dependency. And that's what I think we've done for too many, at least for the institutional nature.
Thank you very much, Father McClain.